Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everybody. Apologies in advance. I'm dealing with still that cough that you heard a couple weeks ago. I will be departing around 11 a.m. this morning to go see a doctor about it. Hopefully it's nothing too bad. Unfortunately, it's not just a cough. I'm also winded a lot of the times, which is not common for me. But anyway, more to follow. We have most of the TAC folks on. There are a couple of people that have emailed me separately to let me know that they either could not make it or maybe delayed or may have a conflict depending on how things turn for them. But we have a good contingency here, so we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who are new, my name is Mo Miskell. I'm the Deputy Division Director for Division of Housing, and I'll be leading this discussion as much as possible. If I break out in a rage of coughing, I will have Sam Albrecht step in for me. He's the Director of our Office of Regulatory Oversight. I'm going to start with having the TAC members introduce themselves. I'm actually going to start with our newest TAC member. Robbie, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Robbie Schwartz at Built Tank Inc. I am I'm still an energy rater, but have done a lot of code development work in the energy arena. And I think I've worked with a few of you folks as well. So I'm happy to join on. I'm also just getting over COVID, so I'm probably going to keep my screen off as well.
Thanks, Robbie. Good luck with recovery, and thank you so much for taking the time to join, especially if you're not doing well through the COVID. So Robbie, for those of you who don't remember, House Bill 22-1242, the tiny home bill, in essence, that we're all here to implement, included 3 new TAC members, right? 2 from the tiny home industry and 1 from energy conservation. So Robbie fills that last slot. So this is now a complete TAC of 15 members. So that's the good news. So moving forward, we should be rocking and rolling with all the positions filled. Thank you so much, Robbie, once again, for taking this assignment on. All right. Oh, before I continue, also, for those of you who are new to this, as much as possible, keep yourself muted unless you're speaking. If I hear background noise from somebody, I will mute you. Don't take it personally. It's just disruptive. And if you are on the phone, which I don't think I see anybody, so I guess we don't have to worry about that. But for those of you who are on a computer, which seems to be everybody, if you want to be recognized, just simply raise your hand and I will ask you to speak after you've done so, if the timing is right. I will try to be as vigilant as possible. If for some reason I have missed you, don't hesitate to use the chat feature to let me know that I have missed you and you've had your hand up for a while and would like to speak. If you've had your hand up, you've spoken, and you're no longer speaking, please lower your hand to eliminate confusion as to whether or not you want to speak again. Okay, simple ground rules. If anybody sees anybody call in, just let me know so I can give them the ground rules for raising their hand and unmuting themselves on the phone. Okay, Sam, you want to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. I'm Sam Albrecht. I'm the Director of the Office of Regulatory Oversight and work with Mo and Donnie.
Great, thanks. Donnie, please introduce yourself.
Sorry, I'm not going to show myself this morning either. I'm kind of dealing with a nasal thing, so I might have a runny nose while I'm talking. But my name is Donnie Featherman. I am the Program Manager for the Building Codes and Standards section within the Division of Housing. And so I oversee all the manufactured structures that come into the state of Colorado.
Thanks, Donnie. Appreciate it. Hope you get better as well. All right, let's jump into the TAC members that have been on for some time. Jeff Dickinson, I don't think I saw him. So we'll jump to Justin.
Hey, I'm Justin Fluckey, a structural engineer, licensed in Colorado and 45 other states.
Great, thank you, Justin. Good to have you on board again. I know Janine is out recovering herself. Tim,
Hi, good morning. Tim Pate, Chief Building Official with the City and County of Broomfield. Glad to see everybody. Glad to see the new folks too. Good to see you, Robbie.
and for those of you who are new, Tim has also been appointed to serve on the Energy Code Board, which is a new board in Colorado, working on some stretch codes for our state. So he's doing triple duty between this, that, and of course, being the building official for the City and County of Broomfield. Mark,
Good morning, everyone. Mark Lindsay, ICC NTA. I think this is my 8th year serving with Mo on the TAC committee. So it's been a ride.
always a pleasure, Mark, but don't age me. I've only been with the division for 5 years. You predated me. A few of you have predated me.
That's true. I was here when Rick and those guys were here.
That's right. That's right. But it has been a privilege working with you for the last 5+ years. Sumit, I believe, said he would try to join us if he could. Doesn't appear he has. James,
Hello, everyone. My name is James McLean. I'm the Field Operations Manager for Arapahoe County.
thank you, James.
Thank you, sir.
John,
Good morning, everyone. I'm John McGee. I'm the State Plumbing Inspector Supervisor for the Plumbing Board. And this is my first year working with you on the TAC.
and it's good to have you, John, as well as James on the TAC. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. And John Meyer had emailed me earlier about maybe making it on a phone. I don't see anyone on the phone, so I'm guessing he was not able to do so. And then Mike Morrow, I don't see Mike Morrow either. Sean, you're up next, sir.
Yeah, my name is Sean Roos. I'm with Clayton Homes out of Grand Junction, manufactured modular home industry, also a general contractor.
Thank you, Sean. How many years on the TAC for you? Are you beating Mark?
Whatever year it started is when I got on it. So
Okay, you've been
I'm
on
not-
for.
was that 10, 12, whatever years, I think.
Wow, that's impressive, sir. Thank you so much for continuing to serve the state. Nate had said he would be on. He might be running late. I do not see Nate. So he may be joining us later. Tracy.
I don't
Tracy,
see,
you-
I don't see Tracy, Mo.
I see
Oh,
Tracy.
there I
I'm looking
go.
right at
Oh,
her.
there you are.
Sorry.
No
Good
worries.
morning.
Good morning. Good to have you.
My name's Tracy Manchego Baker. I'm with Tiny Building Experts out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. I do tiny house industry consulting, subject matter expert, and help a lot of the tiny house small businesses here throughout the state and others as well, across other states as well.
Great.
So
Thank
here
you, Tracy.
supporting the industry.
That's right. Good to have you on board. Margarita, I don't see Margarita. That takes us to, and of course, we already met Robbie. We started with Robbie. All right, I suspect some of the TAC members will be joining us later. But as I said, we're just gonna go ahead and get started. We got a lot on the agenda to cover today. Let me share my screen. Of course, okay. Can you guys all see my other screen here with the slide deck on it?
Don't see it.
Oh, you don't see it?
No,
Oh, I got it. Well, that's because I forgot to hit share again. Can you see it now? Did I agree?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. What I don't like is it then removes my ability to see all of you. Oh, I know what I can do. Sorry.
I think if you go to your view settings, you can change to gallery view or speaker view or something like that.
Yeah, I'm also getting the participant view and the chat view and moving them to different windows because I like to monitor those at the same time as well. The good stuff. Okay. You guys ready? We've covered introductions. Oh, I forgot. We have a not a large number of attendees that are non-TAC members, and of course Eric. Because of that, and especially since Margarita has joined. Let me promote her to panelist real quick. Margarita, can you hear me? If you could introduce yourself, it would be greatly appreciated. If you are doing so, you're on mute and we can't hear you. I can see you, Margarita, but I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I didn't know that you were talking to me. I was just coming.
No worries. If you introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yes. So I'm the owner of MiniDuel. We specialize in small scale architecture, and yes, we are just here to help.
Awesome. Thank you, Margarita. Sorry to catch you in mid-transition there. All right. So for the public, I'm going to start with Anne Marie. If you could introduce yourself, unmute yourself, introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hi, I was trying to work out how to use it on the phone. My name is Anne Marie Cottrell from Tiny Town. So I'm calling in from Australia, from the Sunshine Coast.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Nice.
Thank you for joining us.
You're most welcome.
I'm guessing you are by far our furthest participant today.
Yeah, it was 1:30, what is it, 1:45 a.m.
Oh, wow. Wow. And the latest participant. Apologies for keeping you up so late. Hopefully it's
Probably
good
the
value for you.
sleepiest.
Fair enough. Good to have you on board. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brad Wiseman. Unfortunately, I can't hear you, Brad, but you are unmuted on my end. Unfortunately, I still can't hear you, Brad. Unfortunately, still nothing, Brad. I think we'll move on and hopefully you can introduce yourself later. Or perhaps Dan Fitzpatrick can introduce you. Dan.
Hi, Dan Fitzpatrick. I'm president of the Tiny Home Industry Association, calling in from sunny California.
Thank you, Dan. Since you work so closely with Brad, do you want to introduce him since we can't hear him?
Yeah, Brad is the CEO and chairman of the board of the Tiny Home Industry Association.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. And thank you for joining us as well as Brad. And then David Tompos. We'll start with senior, I guess, if you're both on the same line together. Or actually, you're all on separately. So I don't know which one is which. So I'm going to unmute you both. And
all right. Well, this is Dave Tompos. I guess you refer to me as Dave Tompos Jr., but I'm president of ICC NTA. So I appreciate you having us today.
Of course.
And I'm Dave Tompos Jr., Senior, and I'm with ICC-NTA, and I've been in the offsite housing business for 45 years, helping develop codes for numerous different groups.
Great, thank you. Great to have you both on. Much appreciated. Hugo. You would like to introduce yourself? That'd be greatly appreciated.
Okay, here we go. I'm Hugh Aguilar. I am the VP of Codes and Standards for IATMO.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Hugo.
Welcome.
Robin Butler.
Yeah, hi, guys. Robin Butler, I'm CEO of NOAA, third-party remote inspection company for tiny houses on wheels.
Great, Robin. Thanks to have you on board again. Oh, I see Nate. Nate, I'm going to promote you to panelist. Sorry, I didn't see you earlier. And Nate, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great. Nate's a TAC member, everybody. I can't hear you, Nate.
I am here.
Ah, there you are.
Finally, thank you.
If you could just introduce yourself to everybody, that'd be great.
Oh, okay. Nate Peterson. From the tax standpoint, I'm an installer as well as a retailer, also a mechanical engineer. And that's it.
Great. Thanks, Nate. Tani.
Good morning. This is Tawny Payton with the Rocky Mountain Home Association. We represent the manufactured and modular home industry in Colorado.
Great. Thank you, Tani. Good to have you. Philip.
Mute.
I
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Philip Bona, San Diego, California. I am a semi-retired architect. I had some things to do with the approval of tiny homes in the state of California as I was in a position to help out back in 2016. And I'm happy to be here. I'm an advisor to the groups.
Advisor to who? Sorry.
To different groups,
okay,
architects and others involved in. There's a number of manufacturers in the San Diego area at I've been helping out.
Very good. Well, hopefully you can help out the folks in Colorado, since that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Great.
Happy to be here.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Mike Schmidt, that is.
Good morning, everybody, from lightly snowing Colorado Springs, as opposed to California, where it's always sunny. I'm Mike Schmidt, CEO of Ensemble Ventures. I've been active in the tiny home space since 2016. I helped pursue some of the initial standards development efforts back then, and then also recently actively involved in the ASTM International standards setting process as one of the primary proponents and stakeholders. We're looking forward to working with the state of Colorado and the stakeholders for improving our current bill and in updating and providing some voluntary consensus standards that will work for our local jurisdiction. So really glad to see everybody joining and participating in this process.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. I think I've gotten everybody. If I have somehow missed you, please raise your hand and I will do my best to call upon you. And of course, if I don't get to you and your hand's been up for a while, don't hesitate to use the chat feature. Eric, yes.
Well, I just hadn't introduced myself yet, so I thought I should.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I made you a panelist and I forgot about you. Apologies.
So I'm Eric Fried. I'm the chief building official of the county, but not the city of Larimer, since there's no Larimer city. And I'll be helping with part of the discussion on construction standards when we get to that point.
Perfect, thank you. So Eric is our distinguished guest this morning. We'll be leading our construction code conversation later. Thank you so much, Eric, and apologies for missing you. All right. We've gone through introductions. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. Let's chat about the planned schedule. So we have an aggressive schedule laid out, a lot to cover. I've highlighted in bold some of the more important, I guess, requirements. Not necessarily, just the things that really stand out. One is, unfortunately, we don't have Byron on the call today. Byron has graciously volunteered to host us. We have set a date that's in bold here on the screen, December 20th. We'll be visiting Lyons, his manufacturing facility there for tiny homes. I will be sending out the address to everybody who's interested in attending. The TAC itself, all the members, of course, are invited. And anywhere the members go, the public's also invited as well. So we'll post it on our website as well, but I'll also send it out to the distribution list of folks that have signed up to receive updates from us on anything related to the workings of the TAC. We're scheduled it for 10 a.m. So hopefully that time works for everybody. If we need to move it back a little bit further, we can do so. But we probably don't want to move it up too early in the morning since some folks may be traveling from afar. I doubt anybody's coming from Australia to visit, but we do have some members on the TAC coming from as far as Nebraska and the Grand Junction area. So I don't think earlier than 10 a.m. is going to work, but we'd be happy to entertain something later if that's more convenient. So just let me know. And then, of course, we're starting off the construction code discussion today, right? Not sure how long it's going to take us to get through that, but hopefully we'll move swiftly and effectively, because at some point in time, we then have to transition to installation standards and foundations for tiny homes. And then, of course, so the site visit will kind of break things up a little bit so people can lay eyes on how this may be happening in smaller manufacturing facilities of tiny homes versus some of the larger modular facilities we're used to dealing with. And then we then transition into tiny home inspections, training, certification. And then we start getting into a lot of other areas that are not just specific to tiny homes, but impact off-site construction in general. And the goal, of course, is to get the tiny home stuff done first before we tackle the rest. But there are some really important things we do need to tackle when I say the rest. And that's all outlined in these 2 pages of planned schedule. So just keep that in mind. We'd love to stick to this as much as possible. Ultimately, what we're shooting for, as you can see in bold on this next page, is a rulemaking hearing before the State Housing Board. So for those of you who are new to our discussion, the Technical Advisory Committee, what we refer to as the TAC, is an advisory group. An advisory committee does not make any decisions. Okay, nothing it does is binding. What it does is make recommendations to the State Housing Board on what codes and standards to adopt. So it's definitely a crucial element in our process. It's just not the final decision maker. That is the State Housing Board. State Housing Board is made up of 8 members, not 4, 8 members, and they're appointed by their congressional district. It used to be 7. Colorado has grown since the last census, and so we added an 8th district, and so we have now 8 members. So that body is who will be presenting any recommendations coming out of this group. Those recommendations will be in the form of proposed rules. And there is a formal rulemaking process that must then occur to gather input. So the process we're going through right now, the stakeholder engagements through the TAC meetings is instrumental in gathering information to help us make those recommendations. But ultimately, there's a formal process to gather information as well for anyone that hasn't had a felt like they haven't been heard, or for some reason didn't hear about this until the end, they can weigh in through written or verbal testimony. All that will be considered by the State Housing Board, and then it'll move to adopt the rules as either proposed or amended based on all the feedback it's gotten. And then what we're ultimately shooting for is to have those adopted rules go into effect in time to implement 1242, House Bill 2022-1242, which is in essence the tiny home bill. And as you can see, once that's in effect, by June 30th, that will be perfect timing for when the bill directs us to start the process for formally certifying tiny homes in the state of Colorado. And of course, that date is on a weekend. So that really the first official date where we can do the people's work would be on July 3rd, which is that Monday. Excuse me. Schedule makes sense to everybody? Anybody have any questions, concerns, comments about the planned schedule moving forward? Oh, Anne-Marie had a question. Will the site visit be recorded? Excellent question, Anne-Marie. Since you are participating from Australia, we're actually going to be playing around, excuse me, with Robin Butler's technology. So Robin Butler does remote inspections. And we're going to try to set that up for those who are interested, excuse me, participating remotely, having that set up. It does require Byron and his staff to have an app apparently set up on their devices. So we'll be working on that. Once we have that information available, we'll share that out as well. And it looks like, Brad, you had some issues joining due to your Firefox web browser. I'm guessing you resolved those. If you would like to speak at any point, now that you have that resolved, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. And Tim, the full list of attendees, this meeting is recorded, so you can always get that information from the recording, if that works for you. All these meetings are recorded for those of you who are new, and we post them on our website, and I send them out. We send them out to the group list as well when we inform the list of the next meeting and provide any documents related to the next meeting. We also provide the recording from last meeting. So anyone introduce themselves will be identified in that recording. All right, looks like we've got one person with a hand up. Oh, Brad. Brad, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something? You're unmuted on my end. Okay, can't hear you, unfortunately. So I might not have the microphone issue quite resolved yet. Sorry, you're having technical difficulties. All right. Tiny home construction standards. This is why we're all gathered here today. We're going to turn over the floor to Eric, who's graciously volunteered to lead this discussion, given his vast knowledge in this arena. Actually, it's because he's been selected because he's been very involved from a local perspective for many years in trying to address this issue of what to do with tiny homes. And for those of you who are new, that led Eric to pursue the bill that we're talking about today in order to bring some regulation to tiny homes through a state program, which is why we're also here. So Eric, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, so I will try not to dominate the discussion, but my intention is to kick this off and then turn it over to all the board members and attendees to discuss what tiny home construction standards should be adopted, whether it's an existing one or a brand new one or an amended version of some existing standard. So where this all came from, and by the way, I didn't exactly volunteer to lead the discussion. I was asked by Mo, but I guess I am responsible in a sense because as a local building official with tiny home builders in our county, we had people coming to us for years saying, I'd like to live in a tiny house permanently. How do I do that? And I had to say, well, we don't have any real legal process to do that. You can amend zoning standards to let me back up a minute. Most building officials consider anything on wheels to be a vehicle and not a building. And therefore you can't get a building permit for an RV. And they fall under local zoning standards, and most, land use codes will allow you to have an RV for 30 days or maybe 180 days, but not permanently. So that was an issue. And so I was asked by my county commissioners to propose draft legislation that we could take before Colorado Counties Inc. and run through the legislature to maybe find a way to have long-term occupancy of tiny houses. So I drafted something, which it turns out was all wrong, but that was okay. It was just a starting point. And our local legislator, Representative Kathy Kipp, agreed to sponsor the bill because our commissioners were all three very much in favor of it. Partly because there's a lot of consumer interest up here and around the state, and because of the affordable housing crisis, of which this could be one, partial solution. So then Kathy Kipp, Representative Kipp, started having discussions, brought in Mo and his team, also talked to the Division of Regulatory Agencies, the Electrical and Plumbing Board, brought in a bill writer, started working on it, and then we had a bunch of stakeholder meetings, and through all that, HB 22-1242 was passed by the legislature, signed by the governor in Fort Collins at the Parkway Mobile Home Park. And here we are trying to find a solution. And there were two big problems I saw, and Tim can speak to this as well, I'm sure, as a local building official, when tiny homes come into our area. Now, yeah, you can build a tiny home on site following the building codes, put it on a permanent foundation, get the footings, foundation, framing, electrical, everything inspected. But nobody does that. Almost no one does that. And even now, maybe, a portion of 1% of the tiny homes might be built that way. That's a path that already exists. Most tiny homes come to a site prefabricated offsite on wheels. And under existing state law, anything prefabricated falls under the Division of Housing's authority. Or if you're a participating county, I think it's called the third party in legislation, who's acting on behalf of the Division of Housing, they can regulate that or that prefab construction. And of course, Mo or anyone correct me if I misstate anything. So it comes to the site already built, and we have no idea. We didn't inspect it. We don't know if anyone inspected it other than perhaps NOAA, or perhaps not even NOAA. Perhaps the builder did it. And so if you're a good tiny house manufacturer, you probably built a safe, long-lasting product. And if you're not, then there's a problem. We know there's bad tiny house manufacturers out there that can be putting people in harm's way. So number one, we don't know who reviewed the plans and the construction for safety. Number two, what standard are you building a tiny house to? And that's what this slide is about. And I put this together quickly, or Mo and I did last week, and I realized this slide has some gaps already. So to what standard do you build a tiny house? Because there really aren't any, a lot of tiny houses are built to one of the RV standards, either the ANSI 119.5 for park model RVs, or they're built to an NFPA 1192 standard for recreational vehicles, because at least that's something, it's built to some standard. The problem, as we all know, is that RVs are not intended for permanent occupancy. They're only intended for temporary occupancy. People want to live in these as their home. So that doesn't really quite fit. Obviously there's, and I'm a governmental member of ICC, so I have a bias towards ICC code. So forgive me for that. There's the International Residential Code, which applies to 1 and 2 family dwellings. We're under the 2021, I believe the state's still under the 2018 version of the IRC. There's an Appendix Q that's voluntary that can be adopted by local governments, which modifies certain things for tiny homes, but only certain things. Typically stairs to a sleeping loft, headroom in a loft, guardrails, egress, skylight instead of egress window, a few things like that. The rest of the home would have to be built per the IRC, and I think there's a couple gaps I'll mention. There's also the 2020 National Electrical Code, which is what governs, typically the electrical installation. There are electrical chapters in the IRC itself, but we typically, personally, we delete those and adopt the NEC. And the NEC, by the way, is the state's electrical code. And that's the minimum electrical code that can be adopted in the state of Colorado within 12 months of the state adopting it. Left out of there also, similarly, the state has adopted a plumbing and a fuel gas code. So that governs the minimum standards for plumbing and fuel gas. I'm reminded that NFPA also publishes a building code, which is the NFPA 5000 Building Construction and Safety Code. There's also the plumbing code. Janet Tomey in her information that was sent out to the whole board mentioned the National Standard Plumbing Code, Appendix L, for tiny houses. And I'm unclear if that's different from the Uniform Plumbing Code, which is my understanding that was the plumbing code that ATMO publishes versus the International Plumbing Code that ICC publishes. So there are those standards for building the house. And again, just to set the table, I see a couple problems with the IRC code and someone who uses it. I mean, the construction can work under the IRC pretty much from the chest, from the floor joists up. If you look at section R307, toilet, bath, and shower spaces, that requires certain minimum clearances for bathroom fixtures, toilet, shower, sinks. That may be hard to meet in a tiny house. And maybe that needs to be amended in a state code or state standard. Number two, there's the energy provisions. And there are a few exceptions in Appendix Q for air leakage testing, which account for the small size of a tiny home. But otherwise, you have to follow Chapter 11. And if you follow the prescriptive path in Chapter 11, for instance, in our climate zone, you have to have R60 ceiling insulation, which can be hard to do when you realize the very tight height limitations of a tiny home and trying to keep it below a certain height so you can take it on the road and stuff. So that might be an issue there. And you can, if you don't use one of the other paths, the compliance paths, then they don't make allowances for the size of a tiny home. And to me, if you have a tiny home that's only half as energy efficient, let's say it's 300 square foot tiny home, only half as efficient as a typical 3,000 square foot regular home, it's still 1/10 the size, half as efficient. You're still using way less energy than a really efficient standard home. So maybe that's something that we could look at. And both Tim and Robbie are on this call and know way more than I do about energy codes. So I'd love to hear them weigh in. And then of course there's the ASTM standard that's under development now through the EO6 subcommittee, and that may solve some of our issues, but that may not be done in time for the aggressive schedule we have to get rules in effect by July 1st. Then I know there's the NOAA Plus standard. I don't think that's the exact wording of it, but the NOAA Plus standard, I believe, is using one of the NFPA or ANSI standards for RBs plus the 2020 National Electrical Code. So that's a potential starting point as well. So that's kind of everything from the chassis up. I think the big issue is that tiny homes on wheels are built on a chassis and they're also on wheels. And I know I've had conversations with David Tompos from ICC NTA, who's told me they've approved tiny homes on wheels, the IRC. I've personally never seen it and don't understand how you do it. So maybe I'm just not getting it. I've talked to a lot of other building officials and they're not sure how you build it on wheels and a chassis to the IRC as well. But so it seems to me that's one of the issues. We'll have to talk about chassis. Some of the information Janet sent out talks about the Washington State program, where they've approved basically tiny homes with a state sticker on them, kind of like what we're going for. But they punt the foundations to the local authority having jurisdiction. And maybe with Sitka, Alaska, the chassis has to be approved by an engineer. We need to know the chassis will meet the loads imposed on the chassis, et cetera. And the only other thing I want to say before opening the discussion up to what people think should be the basis of our standard, if you look at HB 22-1242, which I have in front of me, it says that the board shall promulgate rules as necessary to ensure, and then it goes into a number of things, and it talks about rules must include provisions imposing requirements reasonably consistent with recognized and accepted standards adopted by, and then we try to list the main groups: ASTM International, International Code Council, National Fire Protection Association, and the Colorado State Plumbing and Electrical Codes, or a combination of these standards and codes, which can be modified by the board as it sees appropriate. And then in the later section, when it talks about tiny house standards and rules, there were some language put in there, I think by THIA, Tiny Home Industry Association, or I forget, I'm sorry, I get some of the tiny house groups confused, but which was good language to make sure we understood that these rules had to be appropriate to tiny homes. So the board shall consider the importance of keeping tiny homes affordable, the unique characteristics of tiny homes, such as size constraints and construction on a chassis so they can be moved from site to site, that many tiny homes are built by shops producing fewer than 20 units per year, that many tiny homes are custom built rather than mass produced, and that many tiny homes are built by their owners rather than commercial shops. So we're supposed to keep that in mind when adopting a standard and rules. And basically what that's saying is that tiny homes don't necessarily fit the existing boxes we have. They're not RVs, they're not modulars, they're not manufactured homes. They're not built in a factory that may be cranking out hundreds a year. So that's our charge, to adopt the rules. And so with that, hopefully that at least set the table. And then I'd like to open up the discussion for people to start talking about what should be the basis of our standard. Mo will still be, as the host, will be calling on people when you raise your hand and let's try to just be productive and move this forward. We have a second, we don't have to finish this today. We have next week as well. And we're trying to focus not on the footings and foundations today. Obviously, it's all connected, but we're mostly looking at, above the footing and foundation, what standards should we use for tiny house construction?
Thank you, Eric. Tim, I'm going to call on you, but before I do, thank you, Eric, for that. And thanks for the reminder that, normally we're meeting every other week. We're transitioning oddly from this week to next week and only having 1 week gap between meetings to try to thread as best as possible holidays and holiday, office parties, etc., and people's availability. So we do have a shortened gap between the next 2 meetings, it would being just 1 week. So a lot to turn around in just that time, just to keep on the forefront of people's minds. Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Mo. Eric, well done. Great summary. You brought up, I think, a good point that I hadn't really thought about from the energy code standpoint. When you made the point of the comparison with these structures being so small, 400 square foot or less, in comparison to bigger homes and how they need to comply, and also the challenges, which I'm sure a lot of the tiny home builders are going to have brought up and will continue to bring up with just the space or the framing constraints. And I had not thought about that, but my opinion would be, as we move forward with this, to keep that in mind and put in some sort of a, how would you call it, like an exception or clarification in these standards to accommodate that, but still put some kind of a bench threshold on there, kind of similar, and Robbie could talk about this, similar to from an energy rating standpoint. The other comment I have was, you brought up a good point on the plumbing, the required sizes, that doesn't really deal with it in the appendix. And if we did something, how that would interplay with how the state plumbing board works, in referencing or adopting the International Plumbing Code, which has commercial and residential. Of course, if you go up on the plumbing board, the plumbing board website, they have modified and have amendments up there for just the basic requirements. So those are just 2 comments from what you brought up in your discussion, but good job.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone else have their hands up? We did have some chats going on about the definition of tiny homes to be on wheels. This is what the statute says, and we have to live with what the statute says. There's room to clarify what the statute says, we can do so, but we can't create something that conflicts with the statute says, right? So what the statute says, and I'll drop in the chat as well, is a tiny home means a structure that is permanently constructed on a vehicle chassis. That's number 1. So permanently constructed on a vehicle chassis. Okay, so I don't think the intent was to make that chassis removable, but we can discuss that further. 2, it's designed for long-term residency. 3, includes electrical, mechanical, or plumbing services that are fabricated, formed, or assembled at a location other than the site of the completed home. 4, is not self-propelled, and 5, has a square footage of not more than 400 square feet. That is the definition of a tiny home in Colorado State Statute, the Colorado Revised Statutes, okay? The statute goes on to further inform us by letting us know what a tiny home does not include. Does not include a manufactured home, does not include a recreational park trailer as defined in a different statute of Colorado Revised Statutes, does not include a recreational vehicle as defined in a separate statute in the Colorado Revised Statutes, does not include a semi-trailer as defined in a separate statute in the Colorado Revised Statutes, and last but not least, it does not include an intermodal shipping container. And as clarified by Eric at our last meeting, that does not mean you cannot use a shipping container as basically construction material to create your tiny home. You just can't be using a shipping container by itself to be a tiny home. So that's what the statute says. So we'd love to discuss that further. Oh, yeah, Tracy, I just got I'll send you guys the bill. Here's the bill itself. If you scroll down to page 6 of the bill, towards the second half of page 6, 35A, definition of tiny home. Okay. So just a reminder to everybody, regardless of where you're participating from, or who you represent, or what your background is, we first and foremost have to be grounded in Colorado statute. We cannot go outside of our statute. So we're not here to solve everybody's problems in other states or countries, or other or manufacturers' issues with other areas that make their it makes it challenging for the industry to thrive. We are confined within the 4 corners of this bill that I just shared. Okay, if there's room to clarify some of it, to make it clearer for everybody, we can do that. But we can't create statute here, and we most certainly cannot contradict statute here. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page about that. If you have any issues or concerns about statute, there's a separate process for that. It's called the legislative process. Please find a legislator willing to help you with that process. Okay. Mike just sent us a long chat and then ended it with, for some reason I can't cut and paste anything in chat. I don't know what to tell you on that front. I was just able to copy and paste the very link I just sent. So I'm not sure why it's not working for you, but glad you got that information to us. And Mike, since it's quite lengthy, would you like to unmute yourself and share what you just submitted in the chat?
Yeah, thanks, Mo. Just wanted
Yeah.
to basically give folks the link to the EO6 Performance of Buildings site at ASTM International. Our subcommittee is EO6.26, so we're actively underway. I will try to get the rest of my post in there. I'll have to manually type it in, and we'll have the 6 areas of focus for our subcommittees that might address some of the points that Eric was making earlier. So I'll go ahead and pound that in here manually to make sure everybody gets the benefit of that. So appreciate that, Mo.
Great, thank you. And I can't speak for Zoom, but I know for Google Meet, for example, when you copy and paste something, there's a character limit and it cuts it off. I'm not sure why it's not allowing you just to copy and paste through Zoom. So if anybody has any experience on that, you could help direct Mike on how to do it more effectively, so he doesn't have to retype everything. That'd be greatly appreciated.
So Tim had something in the chat too. I'll help you out, Mo, since I know your throat is not great. Says it appears the legislation does not say anything about wheels needing to be on or removed. And that's true. We didn't, tiny home by definition does not have to have the wheels on or not. That's not listed in there, but it does say it's permanently constructed on a vehicle chassis. And I think the reasoning there was, it's just as important to define what a tiny home is as what it's not. If you're not building on a chassis, if you're building a prefabricated home, then you can already go through a process, either a modular home or a manufactured home. So there wasn't a gap there that we needed to fix. But it's the tiny homes on wheels and on a chassis that really didn't fit in any of the existing boxes. And so I don't know that you can remove them from the chassis. I think the wheels could come off if you wanted them to be on pretty permanently. I think a lot of people want to leave the wheels on because, and the original bill had some stupid language from my account calling something semi-permanent, because people want to be there more than 6 months, maybe a year or 2 or 3, but they're probably going to want to move the tiny house. That's why they're building a mobile house in the first place. And then, we were trying to make it clear that a tiny house is not a manufactured house. We already have a process for that. We already have a process for modular homes. You can't just dump a shipping container on a property and live in it, although people do. I've seen it. I'm sure that people have as well. You could turn it into a tiny house or something. Or you could put the shipping container on site, get a building permit through your local agency, make it meet the IRC code already. I was wondering though, I think it was, Hugo was the one from IAPMO. I don't really know much about Appendix L of the plumbing code. I don't know that might conflict with the state plumbing code, but of course the state board could potentially adopt Appendix L, or if we adopted that as part of our tiny house standards, I guess we'd have to work that out. But I wonder if you could talk something about the plumbing code appendix that I really don't know much about.
Did you want to hear from Hugo? Is that you said about that? We also have John McGee from the plumbing board.
Maybe both, but I think Hugo's with IAPMO, as I understand it, and they're the publisher of the Appendix L for tiny houses.
Okay, let's start with Hugo and then we can jump to John. Hugo, you want to speak?
Sure, Mo, that wouldn't be an issue. So just a little background on the appendices, on the appendix that was added for the Uniform Plumbing Code. The Uniform Plumbing Code appendix just focuses on the plumbing provisions, on the distance requirements, just anything that has to do with plumbing and fuel gas provisions. Nothing related to the building. It's been compared to the building code. There aren't any conflicting requirements. So the appendix can be adopted as is and still be able to comply with the existing building requirements. But yeah, it was mainly written just to focus on plumbing and fuel gas provisions, along with understanding that there's also NFPA 1192, but that's mostly for RV. And it does reference NFPA 1192 for those provisions, but for the plumbing and fuel gas provisions, that's what the appendix is for.
John, thank you, Hugo. John, did you want to add anything further to that?
Well, we don't have any reference to it, of course, in the plumbing code. So that would, yeah, basically there's no reference there. So I wouldn't have any experience with that at all, I guess.
Okay. Fair enough. Eric, do you have any other questions about it?
Hugo, I wonder if you could share with the group, either not necessarily right now, but if, maybe a link that we could read Appendix L, because I don't know exactly what it amends, just like Appendix Q in the IRC amends certain portions of the standard code language. I don't know the content of what's in Appendix L, whether it has to do with drainage fixture units or water supply fixture units or what. Obviously, a tiny house is typically going to have one bathroom and a kitchen sink, maybe a washer, not a whole lot of plumbing fixtures in it.
Sure, Eric, I can provide the appendix to this group. I can send it to you. I can also send you a link to our website where it can be viewed online. So it's readily available, but I can provide it to this group.
Thank you, Hugo. You can drop it in the chat if you'd like and send it to everybody. Just make sure that your audience is everyone and just copy the link and drop it in there. And there's specific details on how to get to that document on the website. If you could enter that in the chat too, that'd be great.
Sure, that wouldn't be an issue. I'll work on that.
Great, thank you, much appreciated.
It's Robin Butler says he has his hand up to discuss law.
Yep. Yep, I was gonna call on him next. Sorry, Robin, we got into the plumbing discussion.
Not a problem. In fact, I had a thought on that too while we're on the plumbing. A lot of tiny houses are built with a shower and a toilet. And then you step out from that quote unquote bath area and there's the kitchen sink. So there is no, sink in the tiny house area, which I wanted to see if that was seemed to be acceptable. When that happens, there's no requirement for an outlet for hair dryers and things like that because there's no bathroom sink there. So just something I have seen in the tiny houses regarding a bathroom, quote unquote, where you use the kitchen sink as the sink for the bath. But there's a publication, it's NFPA applying building codes to tiny houses. It was published in March of 2017. And one of the challenges in Appendix Q is it doesn't work for tiny houses on wheels because the lowest with a drop axle, the lowest floor that you can get is 22 inches off the ground. And when you take that away from the 13.6 height, then and even going with the 6'4" that Appendix Q allows for ceiling heights in kitchens and baths, the stair landing doesn't work on that. And so there's some issues with that. But what they publish in the applying building codes to tiny houses is they say that, well, you could just call the loft a built-in bunk bed or a raised bunk bed. And you could, if that happened, then the egress window could be at the bottom of the stairs or the ladder, and it could be an IRC size egress window. It's a little difficult to get an IRC window in the loft unless you do a skylight, and a lot of builders don't want to do a skylight. So I just thought I'd throw that out there as a possibility for taking a look at what NFPA published there in March of 2017. And then finally, what we've noticed, we meet once a week with our inspectors and we go over some of the challenges that we've had in the last week. And the biggest challenge that we run into is moisture intrusion. So when we're writing whatever standards we adopt or cobble together or write, I think the moisture issue would be a big one. Without having overhangs on a lot of these tiny houses, there's possibility of moisture intrusion. And then with breathing and showering and cooking, creating moisture in a small space. And that's something that I'd like to see addressed in some way, shape, or form when we're talking about 400 square feet or less.
Great, thank you, Robin. And also Mike just sent a link to the publication that you just mentioned. So thank you, Mike, as well. I just pulled it up on my computer. I'll read that later. Oops. Oops. Just realized you're looking at my personal budget as well. Problem about opening up these attachments. Anything else? It looks like Tim sent something in a chat about the 2021 IOPMO UPC Appendix L. Says he doesn't see anything about clearances for plumbing fixtures. Okay. Any other? John, you have your hand up. Jumping in on the plumbing theme.
Sure. Just one thing about the lavatory requirements and I think Eric will agree, in the IRC, it requires hand washing along with the restroom in the IRC, but we're not necessarily having to design this to Colorado Plumbing Code or make our rules. This is going to be something that the Division of Housing will approve, and then we accept, once you give your approval, then we can accept the connections underneath on that part of it. So it's not necessarily, I guess, that a lavatory, and the lavatory is not required inside the restroom, but it does say, minimum requirements for sanitation is a toilet and a tub or a shower, lavatory for hand washing, and a kitchen sink. So, for plumbing code, that's the minimum requirements. Just thought I'd bring that up.
Great, thank you. Tracy?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I appreciate, that Robin as an inspector has probably seen a lot of creative units over the years, especially as he works with a lot of DIYers as well as builders. And I don't want to speak for his company, but from a tiny house builder perspective, I'm gonna say, Austin's over here in the background chiming in here. He's touched over 450 tiny houses since 2014, and not one of them has not had a bathroom sink. So it's not common, like it's very common that we are meeting that requirement. You know, the minimum requirements for sanitary, there's typically a bathroom sink in the bathroom. I've owned, like I said, in 450 units, we've never built one that didn't have one. I do respect that Robin may see it every once in a while, but I think that's where you get some of the DIY or creativity.
Okay.
So I just don't want us to get caught up on some of the things that are probably not going to be, you know, too much of a big deal.
Well, Eric, where else did you want to take this conversation?
Oh, Hugo has his hand up now, so let's go to Hugo and then I'll jump in.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I didn't see Hugo's hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mo and Eric. I just wanted to just provide an overview of that document, the link to the document I provided, because it's a rather lengthy document, considering that it's still under review and it's yet to be published. It will be published early next year. But I believe someone mentioned that doesn't have any clearance requirements. Yes, that is correct. It doesn't have any clearance requirement. But what it basically has, it indicates that it requires a kitchen sink, right? That's a requirement that requires a kitchen sink. It requires a water closet, one lavatory, bath shower, or combination bath shower. So those are the basic requirements. And it just sends you to the appropriate chapter for those specific requirements. If the state adopts another plumbing code, it can just be amended to say, okay, go to that specific chapter, go to that specific section of the plumbing code, because every plumbing code is going to have those requirements. Has a pressure requirements, it has a sizing requirements, and also for the DWV requirements. For the manufactured homes, it sends you to NFPA 501A. So it just has the basic general requirements for anyone that has a tiny home. Instead of combing through the code and try to find what specific sections of a plumbing code you should use, this appendix just sends you to those appropriate sections that you need to comply for the plumbing and the fuel gas requirements. So I just want to provide that overview because it is a rather lengthy document. When you select the link, it's the report on comments, which is the latest document. If you click on the top left, you can just scroll all the way down to Appendix R, which is a tiny homes appendix. Someone mentioned another appendix, but that appendix was the previous one. As we moved along the process, the appendix changed. So now it's Appendix R. Just click on the upper left. You can scroll all the way down to Appendix R to review the language. If there's any questions, you can always let me know.
Thank you, Hugo. Eric, before you jump in, and a couple other people raise their hands, I'm trying to understand something myself. For modular, we don't use the UPC at all. We use the IPC. How many jurisdictions in Colorado use UPC, Hugo?
I'm not sure about that. That's a field service. I can check with field service as we have this conversation, but I'm not certain. I won't be able to answer that question. But say they adopt the IPC. All you have to do is remove the reference to the UPC and include the IPC instead. So it's applicable to other codes. It's not specific to the UPC. The only reason it references the UPC because it's in the UPC document. But anyone can adopt that appendix and just revise the section to the specific or to the appropriate sections of the IPC. So it does not need to be the UPC.
Okay, and you probably don't have this answer either, but if you could look into it, how many jurisdictions have adopted the appendix that may not be on the UPC itself?
Well, the appendix is going to be new to the 2024. So.
Oh, okay. It hasn't come out yet. Got it.
Yeah, it hasn't come out yet, no.
Got it. Fair enough. Sorry, I missed that. I think Mark Lindsay had his hand up next, but unless you want to jump in, Eric, or did you want to wait until everybody spoke first?
No, as long as there's people with their hands raised, let's just keep the discussion going. That'd be great.
Sounds good. Mark?
Oh, you hit right on the head, Mo, with the IPC, UPC. Very few plans do I look at that even reference the UPC anymore. But there was a couple of items, maybe Eric has. There's nothing in the IRC or the HUD that requires the wheels to come off of these units. This seems to be a sticking point, and I'm not sure why. Is it something that we have underneath our rules that says the wheels have to come off?
No, there's nothing that says anything about the wheels.
Okay,
Period. Same thing with a HUD manufactured home, right? You know, we don't have anything that says anything about that.
I mean,
It's just that some people seem to be interested in taking the wheels off. But I think as Eric pointed out, if somebody's interested in a product that's 400 square feet and less,
right,
and wants to place it permanently, there's already a route for it, right? It probably doesn't make sense for them to buy something with wheels, right? They can already buy a modular home, right, built to Appendix Q, since we're on the 2018 IRC, and put on a permanent foundation, and they're good to go, right? But if
Exactly.
somebody wants to buy something on a chassis, more than likely they want it to remain with the wheels on. Perhaps they want to take the wheels off, who knows? But they have more flexibility going that route, where they can then install it on a temporary foundation and take it off and move it if needed. And
Correct.
that's what we're really trying to address here, is that product that's gonna be on a permanent chassis, more than likely will keep its wheels on. No one is saying it has to take the wheels off, right? Unless for some reason they buy something on a permanent chassis, but then want to put on a permanent foundation,
right.
right? Then we can have that discussion, but no one's saying you have to do it.
So it's our definition in the rules for the foundation that seems to be part of the stigma here, or the stick in the mud.
That I don't know. How would the definitions of a foundation be the stick in the mud?
Well, because in our rules, the definition for a permanent, or I hate to use the word permanent foundation, because the IRC basically says all I've got to do is transfer those loads to the ground.
Okay,
So we don't have to put in retaining walls and things like that.
yeah,
or
so I
foundation.
don't know how this helps you or
Well,
takes away.
I'm just trying to get
No,
over-
no, I was gonna segue to actually reading the definitions. So what the definitions and rules mean nothing right now.
Okay,
They've been superseded by definitions in the statute that we talked about. I think at the first meeting on November 11th, November 1st. And I'll put them up here on the screen so you guys can all see. These are the definitions for foundations that we're now dealing with. How does this address or not address what you're inquiring about?
it does, yeah.
Okay, then there you go. So these are the definitions in statute. So, once again, everybody, I know this gets confusing. We're going to be working on rules to clarify statute, but everything we do is going to be grounded in these statutes.
Right.
So please, 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 as much as possible, live and breathe 1242, right? Because we're going to ground everything into that. There's room for potential clarification in statute. What does it mean to not be removed from the ground or building for the permanent definition, right? What does it mean to be removable from the ground or building in the temporary definition? But we can't create something that conflicts with what's in here. Does that help, Mark?
Yeah, it helps. The
Okay.
second part about this, Mo, I just want to make sure for my clarity, we can actually amend a few at our level, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we adopt, well, just like the codes, right? So the TAC has already adopted or recommended to the State Housing Board adopt a variety of codes, right? With amendments, and those are all listed in our administrative rules. So right now we've appended, for example, we've adopted Appendix Q wholesale without any amendments, right?
Right.
But in theory, you could adopt Appendix Q with amendments, just like you do with the rest of the code.
Okay.
Great question, though. Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Mo. I'm gonna start out, I've got a comment, but I'm gonna start out with a question, though, to you, Mo. I
Yes,
know
sir.
that currently, been on the TAC for many, many years, and you currently are under the 2018 IRC and have adopted Appendix Q unamended, just like you said. So if you're doing a plan review in-house on somebody who brings that in currently, how do you deal with the plumbing fixture clearances. I think Eric brought this up as, which didn't even click in until he said it, for, meeting that in a tiny home. And do you make that plan review comment or require them to meet that? So that's a question. And then I'll make a comment after that.
Okay, I don't have the answer to your question myself, Tim. I don't even know if we've gotten any plans for Appendix Q, even though we allow for it. Donnie, are you still on the call? Do you know?
Sorry, I was trying to switch through windows here. We haven't had one in such a long time. I really don't know if when the last time we ever got a tiny home. It's probably been a couple years, probably before I even started with the state. But
Yeah.
With the conversation of the clearances for the plumbing fixtures, a while ago I did look into how tiny homes would be able to comply with meeting the IRC minimum, and the IRC actually doesn't specify for the most part everything inside the home. But if you do look into the property maintenance, the IPMC, the International Property Maintenance Code, it does have minimum requirements there for living space, kitchen space, dining, and then you would take the plumbing clearances in the IRC into account, and you would get like a minimum size. But I think that's a little bit of separate conversation from the bathroom, but it would help with the overall floor plan of the actual build itself. So.
Okay, thanks. So that then we'll kind of move into my comment with that. Let me see how to phrase this. So based on what I heard, I think it was John who mentioned a little earlier that if the TAC and then the state adopts, say, Appendix AQ or Q, whichever, with amendments that are, the amendments are less than what the adopted plumbing code, that they would be okay, the state would be okay, if I think I heard that correctly, because it's going through the program and being inspected and approved with the tag. And then just the connections down below the unit would be under the IPC is what I think I heard. If that's true, then we could, in my opinion, as a TAC group and everybody, come up with an amendment for the plumbing fixture size clearance requirements being reduced, with whatever, and the tiny home, builders would be able to provide that information about, what they might recommend for the sizes. And then we could just move forward with that as an amendment. If we're going down the line, adopting the Appendix AQ, which I certainly hope we do. That's just my comment.
Thank you, Tim. And Tim, we can also ask Greg if he's seen. I just know, based on our, interactions with tiny home builders, it just seems the vast majority, and the consumers for that matter, appear to be interested in a more movable product. So even though we've had the 2018 IRC and Appendix Q in play for several years, I just don't think we've been getting any traction there because of the permanent foundation requirement. But I can ask Greg if he's seen any before Donnie came on board, and we can have that discussion about how he worked through it when he did. I just don't think we've had many, if any. Great. I don't see any other hands up.
Well, let me say a couple things and hopefully move the discussion forward. So, and I would like to ask about energy, especially maybe Robbie on here, about any changes we might want to consider to the chapter 11 of the residential code, or the the residential section of the energy code. There was a question about foundations, and I'm glad ICC is on here because maybe they could answer this. The way I read the IRC, all the loads have to be transmitted to the ground by exterior walls or bearing elements to a foundation, and the foundation has to be below the frost depth as adopted by the authority having jurisdiction. So that, and we'll get to foundations in a later thing. I know that Mike also had a question about foundations. but obviously it's hard to separate the superstructure from the foundation it sits on. So in the IRC, as I understand it, there's only 3 prescriptive foundation types. One is masonry, one is concrete, one's all-weather wood. So you have to use one of those, or you'd have to have an engineered foundation in each case. And I think we were trying to avoid each tiny house having to necessarily have an engineered specific plan to make things easier. So we were trying to come up with something prescriptive. So I think that's where the foundation issue came into effect. And then, of course, there's nothing in the IRC that I know that talks about chassis. You know, there's floor joists, and then the floor joists are connected to the sill plate to the foundation. They're sitting on a beam or something. So that was answered. I forget, I'm sorry, your name on the chat about the question, why was foundations an issue? I think that's where it came from. I'm trying to figure that part out. I'm just curious in terms of the group. It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the thrust is that we would adopt essentially the IRC, including Appendix Q, with some amendments as the basic framework for a tiny house standard. And of course, that would also include the National Electric Code, as well as the State Plumbing Code, which is based on the IRC plumbing chapters and the IPC. Does anybody have a different opinion than just as a starting point? And then maybe we can talk about some of the energy stuff.
Yeah, so maybe, should we just divide it to 2 parts? Does anybody have any issue with adopting the IRC and the appendix? What will we be talking about, the 2018 IRC or the 2021 IRC, and the relevant appendix for the construction of the tiny home above the chassis? And then maybe we could then jump into a separate conversation about a starting point for codes for the chassis and below. Does that make sense to everybody? Mark, you got your hand up.
Yeah, Eric, that's okay. I'm the player to be named later anyway. I agree with Eric. I mean, I think the IRC is a great start. We can amend those sections for where the gaps are at, and at least see how this committee comes out with their findings at ICC. But at this point, with our time restraint, Mo, we've got to have something for a base to get started with and to have this ready. And with Eric and Tim and everyone on here, I mean, this is a great group. You're taking advantage of some of the best in Colorado at this point.
Excellent. I don't see any of the hands up, but there's quite a bit of chatter. I think it'd be helpful, folks, if you could raise your hand and have the discussion verbally so we can all hear you. It's kind of hard to follow the chat at the same time. At least it is for me. And it looks like, oh, Byron's joined us. Byron, would you like to speak? Byron, are you there? Okay, we've seen some technical issues on Byron's end.
Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
There we are. Pardon me. Anyway, my apologies for being late. But the only thing I wanted to share is I'd like to highly suggest that we adopt the 2021 code, not the older code, because a lot of work went into improving the a lot of different areas of it. That's all I need to say.
Do you mean when you say 2021 code, do you mean Appendix AQ?
Appendix AQ, of course.
Okay, so theoretically, we could stay in the 2018 IRC and adopt Appendix AQ from the 2021. Nothing prevents us from doing that. Just throwing that out there. But thank you, Byron. And also, we got a few panelists with their hands up as well. Let's hear from Sean, since we haven't heard from him in a while.
Mo, thanks a lot. I think a good starting point is the IRC code. We're all pretty familiar with it, and obviously there's some things that we're going to have to change up in it related to foundations, maybe plumbing, maybe energy, all those kinds of things. But if we at least start off with a base code, we're creating something new, and I think we can all come together and come up with something that works well for the tiny home industry.
Very good, sir. Nate? I saw your hand up earlier.
It was up. Sean said what I was going for, so I'm good.
Okay,
I
perfect.
like the idea of identifying a code and then working from there, just because having done this for years as we go through it on the manufacturer side, it's good to establish the starting point and then, kind of everybody work through systematically the modifications that need to happen after that point, and wanted to see the group kind of make that high level decision so you can get working on the details. So that's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Nate. Tim?
Yeah, I'm all in on the ICC, the IRC appendix, whether it's the Q or the new. I'd go with the AQ. Just they did make a few changes that I think we're helped it out a lot. But I'm always of the opinion that using a standard, or in this case, a code that's been vetted internationally, mostly nationally, but it's definitely an international code, makes it a lot easier to sell it, because it's part of my business in a way as a building official. When we're adopting the codes and enforcing the codes, is we enforce it, we adopt it, we enforce it, but we have to sell it and be able to say this thing was vetted by building officials and industry all over the country and take part. It's so much easier to sell that, and to my city council, but from your standpoint for the Division of Housing statewide, in different parts of the state. So yeah, and I just propose, we start out as a base to, start out with a couple things we've identified for potential amendments. Say not a big deal on the plumbing fixture sizes, deal with some of the energy code, lowering the thresholds for 2. Those are probably the 2 big ones I see. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tim. Sean, I just saw you chat about the slide presentation. I actually shared it in the email I sent last week, I think. So it should be in your email about this meeting from last week, the actual slide deck. But if you need me to resend it, I'd be more than happy to do so.
No, I'll look. Sorry, I just probably missed
No.
things.
No worries, no worries. It had a lot of information packed into it. And then and David Tompos, you had a comment about amend Appendix Q to have any foundation you want. Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Well, it sounds like the committee is going down the path. What makes sense to me is starting with the IRC and then making amendments to where you feel the gaps are. I feel it would be in the best interest of the committee to start putting a list together of what those gaps are. And one of those is foundations, but trying to figure out how to then amend the IRC or the Appendix AQ to address those. I want to reiterate the fact that there's nothing in the IRC that says that you can't put these homes on a chassis or leave the wheels on them, for that matter. But where it seems that the gaps are there were a couple gaps with what we do with the foundation, a couple gaps with possibly the energy. I absolutely agree that it's difficult to put an R60 insulation in a small roof cavity. We've been dealing with that with the HUD code, and actually 2 weeks ago we determined we weren't going to put an R60 in the HUD code. So it just to me sounds like the committee is going down the right path of making amendments where the current standard does not address what needs to be addressed for tiny homes.
Great, thank you for clarifying. Sorry, Robin. I think it says in chat that your hand was up. I don't see your hand up anymore.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I think I clicked it off there after a while. But yeah, it was a couple of things, questions. How often is it annual that you can amend the whatever standards or codes you're going to use for Colorado? In other words, if there is an adoption of Appendix AQ, is that something that's revisited, annually or, how often, I guess, or could it be more often if it's not, something's not working? Second, are you, when you're writing standards to be adopted as codes, as an amendment, I mean, I'm trying to visualize in my brain, do you say, okay, instead of, 30 inches wide for your water closet or toilet, we're going to make that 27 or something? Is that quote unquote legal? And thirdly, like I mentioned, the loft access doesn't work. Could you write something in an amendment to an appendix AQ that would fix whatever problem is there? And then finally, since appendix AQ is basically dealing with lofts and loft access and sizes and things like that, can you amend it to include a prescriptive chassis and a prescriptive foundation, or is that not appropriate in an appendix amendment?
Robin, thank you. It's always dangerous to ask 4 questions in a row without getting them each answered, because then that relies on my memory. So I'll try my best to address all your questions. You may have to repeat some of your questions if I didn't get to them. I'll start with the first one. We revisit our rules annually. We try to, because inevitably there's always something that we discover is not working as intended, or an issue crops up that we didn't anticipate, and then it may require some rulemaking. We haven't been through rulemaking in the last couple of years though, because there's been a lot going on different fronts, but we were planning to revisit rules. We try to revisit rules every year. There's usually something. So the beauty about rulemaking is you can do it at any point in time. You don't have to wait for the legislative session, for example, right? Which in Colorado happens annually between January and May of every year, roughly the middle of January to the middle of May every year. We can do rulemaking any point in time. With that being said, though, it's a process, right? So it doesn't happen overnight. We convene the technical advisory committee. We discuss these items. We hash it out. Public participates as well. The TAC makes recommendations, and that has to go before the State Housing Board, and it decides whether to adopt or not. And then there's a whole timeline that goes with that, some of which we have shared. So it's a process, right? So just because we elect to do it in any given year doesn't mean it happens overnight. And it most certainly doesn't happen in the dark. Okay, it's very much a transparent process. As far as your second question regarding legality, I didn't quite catch it. Could you please re-articulate that question?
Well, I'm saying that and then maybe the answer was on the fourth question, but basically, can you legally make a change in a rule that is in essence writing codes and standards? In other words, the example I used was with the clearance on bathroom fixtures. Can you actually change those? And I mean, in essence, the state of Colorado is writing building code. In my mind, when you're doing that, that was kind of my second question.
So I would encourage you to read our administrative rules, which I just sent you. And that should answer your question. So we're guided by statute, not codes ultimately. We're ultimately guided by statute. So we do what the statute tells us to do or allows us to do. And the statute doesn't say we have to adopt the code as it's written. There's nothing about that in the statute anywhere that I can see. You can find it, please direct it to me. So if you look at our administrative rules, you'll see plenty of examples where codes are adopted, but also amended, to answer your question. And that is very much legal. So whether the TAC recommends to do that is a different conversation. And whether the State Housing Board agrees to adopt it is a different conversation. But as far as legally being allowed to do it, it is. I don't see anything that prevents a local jurisdiction from doing the same either. Right? I've seen plenty of examples of that, where local jurisdiction adopts the code, but it makes amendments to it. So I would encourage you to read the administrative rules that we currently have in place, so you can get an idea, and not just you, anyone else that's new to this, read our administrative rules and you get an idea of how this approach has been taken for modular construction in the state. Doesn't mean it's going to be the same for tiny homes, but it'll give you an idea of examples of how code was adopted for modular sector and then amended for whatever reason to be different for the state of Colorado, if you will. Sean, you got your hand up? Oh, wait, actually, before we get to Sean, Sean, did you want to jump on that, or can I finish answering Robin's questions?
No, go ahead. I'll wait.
Okay, thank you. So does that address your fourth question though, Robin?
No, the fourth question was basically, are you able to make amendments to Appendix Q, which addresses mainly loss, and actually write some prescriptive amendments for a chassis as a foundation, a chassis as a floor system, or a foundation system, and then paying attention to the possibility of still having it movable in that respect?
Yeah, I think that ties into the second question. It depends on where the TAC wants to go. So the TAC could have, I just gave you an example earlier. We're currently on 2018 IRC for modular homes. We've adopted Appendix Q, right, for tiny houses on permanent foundations. If the TAC, for example, wanted to adopt the 2018 IRC for tiny houses, right, and wanted to adopt Appendix AQ from 2021 and want to make changes to it, all that's okay. What they specifically does is yet to be discussed, right? But I think, unless I'm missing something, your question 4 is very much related to question 2. It's just getting ahead of us. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that kind of,
Okay.
and sorry, I don't, I don't know all the policies and procedures exactly that that Colorado is under.
No,
so
no worries.
I'm
It's
kind
you know,
of,
every state is different. I understand that, which is why it's always helpful to understand our process. So just to recap for everybody, it starts with statute, right? That's set by the legislator. We have an opportunity here to create recommendations to the Technical Advisory Committee on what standards and codes to adopt through proposed rules. Those proposed rules have to be adopted by the State Housing Board. And when they go into effect, they go into effect with the same enforcement as laws, right? But they cannot conflict with statute and they cannot create statute where it doesn't exist. So that's our framework. And within that framework, unless it's specifically addressed in the statute, an example for this is modular, okay? Modular in our statute, what we call a factory built residential structure, has to be on a permanent foundation. That's in our law, right? So we, for example, for modular, adopted the 2018 IRC and said a modular, and IRC mercifully says it has to be on a permanent foundation as well. But if for some reason somebody decided we don't want a modular home to be on a permanent foundation, we can't do that. Our state law specifically says it has to be on a permanent foundation. Another example for tiny homes is the definition of a tiny home says it has to be on a permanent chassis, right? So we couldn't create a situation where we're now certifying something that's a tiny home that's not on a permanent chassis, right? So ultimately we have to be grounded in statute. After that, there's great flexibility in how we do it. It's just going to be dependent on the conversations through the TAC, what the TAC recommends, and the State Housing Board adopts. And what's your question number 3?
I forgot.
Okay,
Sorry.
no worries. That's the danger about asking
Yeah,
more questions at the same time. Write them down. If you think about it, feel free to send in the chat, or of course, raise your hand again, Robin.
Yeah.
Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. Just mostly a comment, being on the TAC for many years. Once a housing board, and this is mostly for other participants if they're not aware, once a housing board adopts the code, it becomes preemptive so that all jurisdictions in the state pretty much have to follow that. There could be some outlying snow load factors or things like that that we'll probably get into. But still, local jurisdictions are going to have the ability to, look at utility connections below the structure and the foundation structure and all that kind of stuff. So we're not, that really, it's a piece of this conversation, but local jurisdictions still can kind of follow whatever they have adopted for, they want to adopt for their area. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mo. I just wanted to kind of throw that clarification out.
Yeah, no, Sean, you're spot on, and thanks for the reminder. Especially since we've got new people that have joined us. Well, we can't address our zoning requirements. That's still very much up to the locals, right? We can't address site work unrelated to the construction of the structure itself to be code compliant, and its installation. That's still with the locals, right? And if there is a local building department, they're going to be in charge of the foundation itself. So for the most part, what we're talking about is the construction of the structure, in this case, a tiny home, right? That'll be under our jurisdiction. By our, I mean the state. It's going to be a state certified program. Excuse me. And if local jurisdiction allows for this product to come in into an area that it's zoned for, they have to accept our requirements, right? They can't impose their own separate requirements concerning the construction of the structure itself. The exceptions being, as Sean alluded to, his unique geographic and climatic conditions, such as wind and snow load. And we also now have to consider fire risk, wildfire risk. So we'll get to that discussion later. Apologies. And also the installation of the product is also under our jurisdiction. So the locals don't have say on that. They can be involved in our process and help us, but they can't dictate their own requirements. Is that what you were trying to get to, Sean?
Yeah, I was just trying to bring that overall context.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I appreciate it. I think it's important that we revisit that, even though most of us understand that. Some people are new to it. And of course, some people have joined us today that haven't joined us previously. I apologize. I'm falling apart here. All right. I don't see any other hands up. Sean, sorry, was somebody still talking?
Yeah, that was me. Mo. I was just going to say, give you a break here. So it
Yeah,
seems
please
like
do.
the consensus building is to, at least for now, adopt the IRC with appendix Q or AQ, depending which volume of the IRC we do, as the basis, and enumerate the areas where we want to make some amendments to that, whether it's chassis, fixture clearances, energy, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious though, of the tiny home builders that are on the call, are you already building to IRC with appendix AQ? If that was adopted as the state standard, would that present any great problems to you? So I guess I'd love to hear from Tracy, Byron, Brad, Mike, Margarita, anyone else representing kind of the tiny home industry side of things.
Great, thank you. Looks like Byron's got his hand up. Byron?
Yes, I'm for the most part building to appendix AQ, yes. So it would be no problem for me, and I highly encourage it. I love it. I'm thrilled with having appendix AQ as a definition to build to.
Great. Dan, you get your hand up too?
Yes, in chatting with a number of builders around the country, I would say that most builders of quality movable tiny homes are building 97, 98% of the way there to the IRC standards inclusive of Appendix AQ. Yes, there are a few gaps that would be helpful to clean up, specifically around the issues of interfacing the chassis to permanent or temporary foundation, and the whole issue of insulation. The insulation issues are just way too high to fit into a little tiny home. And I'm glad that the committee was or discussed this earlier. Makes a lot of sense. A 300 square foot house compared to a typical 25 to 3,000 square foot house is just doesn't make sense to have the same insulation requirements.
Great, thank you, Dan. And you just reminded me of something, and it kind of touches upon something that Robin had raised in his questions, is because we can revisit rules whenever we want, you know, all this is subject to change, right? So we need something immediate for Colorado because of the deadline imposed in the bill. But if, you know, the industry evolves, especially on a national front, right, and create standards that better address all the holes, right, and puts it in a better package, then that's something that this body can also consider in the future, right? So what is in place today, in essence, can change if something better comes along. So just something to keep in mind as well. Tracy.
Yeah, I was just gonna mimic a little bit of what the other teammates said here, and I think that any of your, you know, good builders are striving to meet IRC already. We all know that there's a couple of exceptions, you know, to those that we'll work on as a team here, but I think it's a good starting point. You know, so, you know, from that perspective, I don't think that you're going to get a whole lot of pushback. Plus the fact that, Mo, you just acknowledged that if something else comes down the pipe that's a little bit better later, and I think as long as we stay open to that and we make sure that, kind of like the way we had it written in the bill, you referenced, you know, a future code, if you will, that was being worked on. So I think that as long, you know, as long as we allow that a little bit of flexibility, that's going to make a world of difference. So yeah, I think everybody would be pretty on board to that.
Great, thank you, Tracy. Margarita.
Yeah, I just agree with all that have been said before, and also I've noticed that county officials are more familiar to IRC overall, so that will be also like an easy step for us to move forward. We won't need any extra education in that sense. Well, that's a belief, and also I think it covers, as Tracy said, it covers the house, the tiny home on wheels, even though it's not specific on certain words or vocabulary like chassis and things like that. So it's easy to adapt to situations like we've discussed before: plumbing, structure, and foundation. So I definitely agree to follow that code.
Great, thank you. Nate.
Mo, I had a question for you, and also a little bit of a preview for those that are new from the tiny home side. But, you know, what we end up with, you know, as an outcome of these meetings is, you know, basically a recommended set of rules where, you know, towards the end of the process, you know, Mo's going to have a document up on the screen with a bunch of, you know, recommended rules, adopting, you know, a code, but then also, and more importantly, probably is all the exceptions and modifications to it in different areas. And in the end, we end up redlining that, you know, fine tuning, wordsmithing, that sort of thing. But I guess, Mo, I kind of wanted to ask you, when do you see that document starting to kind of be at the forefront of the conversations? Because I know once we really get to that is kind of when we get into a lot of the weeds and stuff like that, and just kind of explain, you know, kind of when you hope to see that process starting to unfold.
Excellent question, Nate. It's on the plan schedule that I shared in the slides 4 and 5. I am hoping that we can get through all these discussions through February 14th and start actually tackling draft documents by February 28th. Now, with that being said, I would like to receive that information. You know, for example, so far so helpful, right? We're starting with the IRC in Appendix AQ. I don't think we've established what year yet, IRC, but that will be my starting point, right? I will put that. As we identify the areas that need to be further addressed, right? Then we need to do that, and I need language for that, right? And people can look at the format of our administrative rules to kind of help guide them on what this kind of should look and feel like, right? And I can start putting that together. But the idea is to have draft rules in place by 28th for us to start looking at February 28th. But before that, as we're having these discussions, right, I'm going to start providing starting points if somebody else is not helping me with starting points, right? So I'll be crafting a framework, to address tiny home construction, right? For you guys to look at the next meeting. And then hopefully we can get through that and say yay or nay, that's heading in the right direction, provide some feedback. We'll then also start tackling the foundation installation standards conversation, right? So at that next meeting, December 13th, my hope is to have some language for you to chew up for that piece, right? So with that being said, you're going to see pieces between now and February 28th, but ideally on February 28th, we're going to have a whole draft document that we're then looking at, right? To see how it all works together. Does that make sense? Awesome. Great question, Nate. Tani.
I just wanted to echo what so many other people have said as far as, I guess using the IRC Appendix AQ as the model and then dissecting each section and make improvements if you all already have ideas or are experiencing things that you think could be improved on. Those are the opportunities where those can be modified and considered for adoption for our Colorado Tiny Home Code. And just to add to the rulemaking question that Robin had and that you answered, Mo, there's also the opportunity, or I guess the option of the Colorado State Housing Board adopting some sort of an emergency rule if there's something terribly wrong that needs to be addressed right away, and there really isn't the time for the industry to wait for that rulemaking process, that timeline to play out. So that's also an option, if I recall correctly. So just wanted to throw that out there, just for everybody, if there are concerns about there being a rule or a code being adopted that doesn't work, that it doesn't mean that production stops until it can be changed.
That's correct. And thanks for that reminder, Tani. Yeah, we have the opportunity for emergency rules. We don't exercise it very often, but there was an electric code issue some time ago, which we probably should revisit to see if it's still an issue during the early parts of COVID. And we ran an amendment to the NEC. So we adopt the NEC simultaneously when the electrical board does. But we had this issue for modular, actually across the board, but the State Housing Board was taking longer than was helpful for our manufacturers. So we moved quicker and adopted emergency rules to make an amendment to NEC that we then adopted as permanent rules. So even though you can adopt emergency rules to go in effect sooner, they're only good for 120 days. Okay. So during that time frame, if you want to make them permanent, you have to then go through the formal process that we're now engaging in to make them permanent. But that is always an option if needed. Great. Byron, Dan, you still have your hands up. Did you, or Dan, you just put your hands down? Byron, did you have something to say? Dan, your hands back up. I'm confused.
No, I didn't have any questions. I'm good.
Okay. Okay. If you just put your hand down when you're done talking, that'd be great. It eliminates confusion. Dan?
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, just a point that you were talking about as a base that the 2018 with Appendix Q or the 2021 code with Appendix AQ. I've seen a number of municipalities use the 2018 code as a base, but then also approve AQ. which is simply a better way or clarification of Q, which in many ways was poorly written the first time around, and AQ is a much better document to start from.
Correct. That's one of the options I provided earlier.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. So we could stay at 2018, which we're currently on, and then adopt AQ from 2021. That's definitely an option. Sam, get your hand up.
Yes, sir. So just as we talk through the rulemaking, you know, the other thing that we purpose for this rulemaking is to give industry some indications on how to implement the legislation also, and how we see implementing the legislation. Yes, we can make changes whenever we want to, but every time we do that, we take the risk of impacting industry and able to deliver a product. Donnie keeps a list of technical issues that we want to further clarify in our rules, and we'll see that a little bit later. But let's just keep in mind that yes, we have to make sure that if we have something that affects public health and safety, we have the emergency option to do that. And then as other things come on, let's, and this is a long iterative process, right? When we're done here, you guys won't want another change for another year, but annual changes are probably the best things to consider. And we can keep a running list of stuff that needs to be addressed in the next year. Just my thoughts.
No, thank you, Sam. And for those of you who have not had a chance to review the administrative rules, which I encourage you to do, you'll notice in there a paragraph that I'm sharing with you right now. So after we adopt code changes to the State Housing Board, we do allow for a grace period for the current process for modular, right? And I suspect this will be a starting point as well for tiny homes. So we basically give folks 180 days to rework their process to come into compliance. So it doesn't happen overnight, right? So nobody should ever be surprised by code changes in Colorado. It takes, even if it's emergent, right? We're going to notify you, right? And if it's emergent, it's different. For some reason, we're saying you have to do this immediately, then that's a different story. But we'll notify you about that and why. But it's very rare. And it usually is to help the industry, not the other way around, right? For permanent rulemaking, it's the long process, which we've just started, right? And so nobody should be surprised by it. But even at the end of that process, and we're talking about June 30th here, right? People still, if we make any changes, for example, through that process that impact modular construction and industry that already exists, they're going to have 180 days to react to it. We can, of course, always change that, but that's historically been what's in place, and we haven't touched that. Okay. So it sounds like 2018 IRC base with Appendix AQ from 2021 IRC is our starting point for tiny homes. Is that correct? Does anybody disagree with that?
So I would like to say, recommend we go with the 2021, and I know that would be ahead of the state, but these rules would go into effect, the standard would go into effect July 1st, 2023, which is actually closer to the publication of the 2024 IRC than it is to the 2021 IRC, which came out in January 2021. So it'd be a couple years behind if we stayed with the 2018. And I'm sure that as busy as you are, Mo, with all the things we the voters keep passing and putting on your plate, at some point you'll also be updating to the 2021. So it just seems to me it'd be better to start with the 2021 in Appendix AQ, and also not to forget that we'd also want to adopt the 2020 NEC, in my opinion, as the electrical code, which is what the state has and works better than, I forget, chapters 34 to 41 of the IRC, which are the electrical chapters.
Yes, you raise an interesting, important point. And we actually have this scheduled for discussion on January 17th. But since we're talking about the base code for tiny homes as being 18 or 2021, we might as well have discussion now. So historically speaking, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I got so animated, ripped out my headphones. This body historically has recommended code changes every other code cycle, right? So when I started in 2017, this body had recommended and the State Housing Board had adopted prior to that, the 2012 IRC, IBC, etc. The anomaly was, for some reason, it was on the 2015 IECC. So when I started in 2017, everything was 2012, except for, of course, the electric code, which is on a different cycle. And then, but we always adopt, as I mentioned earlier, what the State Housing Board adopts. So we're on the same frequency with them, right? On the electrical, so that part is taken care of. Everything else we've been on every other cycle historically, except for we've had an interesting history with energy code, which I'll get to in a second. So when we were on 12 when I started. We didn't adopt 15. We skipped 15 and we went to 18. And so that's how historically it's been working. So in essence, what will be happening next, Eric, for the modular side of things and potentially tiny homes, but of course, this is a discussion we can have in detail, is what would normally happen then is we would be on the 18, even though 21 is out, skip to 21. We may adopt things out of it that we like, AQ being an example, and then go to 2024, right? Does that make sense? So we've been doing every other. I'm not married to it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. That's just historically how it's been happening for this program. Sean?
Yeah, Mo. I don't know. I just, from my perspective, the reason we do this lag behind the other changes on the code is to see how it's implemented in the real world standards. And I just think it would be smart to tie the current IRC that the state is working on to the tiny home. And then as we look at adopting things, look at adopting it as we go. So in this case, 2018 with an AQ addendum or appendix. And then if whatever we decide to do related to the state, the IRC code going forward, update the tiny home along. But it just seems like that would be simpler.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Nate. To me, it's just simple. Sorry, Sean. I was looking at Nate's hand up while I was talking. To me, as much as possible, where there's areas we can keep consistent, where it makes sense to keep consistent, move them along together, right? There are going to be areas where they're going to be different, and then we address that separately, right? But if we're going to be on 2018 IRC base for modular, I would recommend the same for tiny homes. For whatever reason, we decide to go on the 2021 base, right? Then it would be for both. But yeah, Sean raised a good point. We another reason historically why we kind of stayed back is let the local jurisdictions identify all the holes and issues with the latest and greatest IRC, and then kind of react to that, right? As we prepare for our code adoption. Nate, as I mentioned you earlier.
I was gonna say the same thing. A lot of the work on this committee is the new code adoption stuff. And if we're flip-flopping back and forth, it's literally double the work if the tiny homes are going to adopt the 2020 and then we're going to adopt the 2023 and then they flip over and adopt the 25 or whatever's next. And so I definitely highly think that we all need to be on the same code so that when we adopt it, a new one, we can all work together to at one time come up with the updates instead of doubling the work.
Yeah. And Justin raised an interesting point. Yeah, there's some issues with 2018, and we've tried to address them in our amendments, right? And so once again, we can always stay base 2018, but if something's not working with it, we can amend it, right? And if something works better in a 2021, excuse me, we can take that language, right? So we're just talking about the base. For better or worse, that's our starting point, but we can always make it better by adopting or creating something out of thin air if we think it works better. Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. It's an interesting, I kind of forgot how the past years, we've skipped, a code cycle and currently being under the 2018, but, I'm agreeing with some of I haven't analyzed specifically the difference language between the 18 and the 21, but I have looked at some of those. I think that the code changes that came through from code officials in the industry helped clean that up some. I also point out that the 2024 IRC, I believe, it made it all the way through all the changes through and accepted by the ICC Board of Directors, if I'm not mistaken, and should be published first part of January. And I know there were some changes again through that code change process to this appendix. I didn't look at what those changes are. I could get a copy of those. I won't have a copy of the full set, but, and also to point out, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that August 1st or whatever, August of 2023, the state will be updating to the 2023 NEC. So that's another overlay from a timing standpoint of how that all interplays with this.
Yeah, no, that's great, Tim. Thank you. And you just made me, with the timing of the 2024, that's interesting. So that's something for folks to consider too, and especially on the modular side. Like I said, it makes sense to keep the bases together, because I think it just leads to less complexity on our end, especially with trying to plan, review, inspect, and certify. But given the timing of this and the timing of when we're trying to implement tiny homes, it is something to think about. Maybe this is the time to move to 2021, right, for everything, right? And then potentially skip 2024. So everybody has time to really settle in with 2021 if we want to stay with the every other cycle aspects as we incorporate tiny homes. So just something to think about as well. Donnie.
Yeah, I guess one thing to think about though is if we, I think it might be easier to stay across the board the 2018 and just make the changes we need to Appendix Q to match what Appendix AQ is, instead of adopting the 2021 AQ, because there are similarities. There are just, some changes that are in the AQ compared to the Q itself. But if we adopt across the board 2021, everybody on the modular side might not like that, especially when we start getting into, changes that will need to happen on the modular side itself, and what codes we're going to be adopting for energy and all that other stuff just across the board to align more with the 21 instead of the 18, how we currently have them, and then wait later on down the road after we get our foundation set for the tiny homes, then start considering adopting a newer code, and then making those changes gradually instead of trying to change the whole modular industry plus revamping the system to include the tiny homes. We're going to probably lose something in the middle of that when we start designing this, the new rules, and make things more confusing on both sides. Not only the tiny home, but also
these are just options. These are just options to consider. And you're right. Well, you just raised another option. So a lot of potential ways we can go with this. Nate, is your hand up from earlier, or is that newly raised? Earlier, okay. Mark.
No, Donnie, I think Donnie hit it right on the head. Basically, we could use the 2018 Mo, and we could go into the 2021, pull the newer sections out as part of our amendments to this, and wait for the 2024 to come out and see if those gaps have been filled. But he's right. We should stay with the code that's prevalent with what we're using right now. I'm not sure how many people can jump back and forth. I know a few of us here do it all the time, but it does get confusing when you've got different amendments or different code sections of different codes that you're enforcing. But yeah, Donnie, we take the 2021 clarifications, we add them to our 2018 under our rules, and anything else that we need to address at that point. And we have our tiny home standard at that point.
That's simple, huh?
I wish.
No, I agree. I agree with you both. I'm a fan of the simpler way of doing it, but these are our options, right? And the timing is interesting with the 2024 coming out. And of course, as Tim mentioned, the 2023 NEC coming out as well. So just an interesting point in time we have here. At some point in time, there's a potential that the modular doesn't move, right, for several more years. Tiny home gets implemented,
right,
and then when modular changes, tiny home then has to change as well. And they've only had a few years on being on this formally, right? So there is no perfect answer. It's what you're going to learn in the world of regulation, right? You thread the needle as best as you can, but there's always something that's going to get lost. But you hope to gain more than you lose.
And it's not that I
But
didn't
those are
enjoy-
definitely the options before us. Sorry, Mark, what were you saying?
And it's not that I didn't enjoy spending all that time with Nate on the last session. But we did spend a lot of time on certain items, and I think the solution is, yeah, we look at this and like you said, Donnie's got the list going. Talking with Donnie several times, I think this is going to be at least a quick, I don't want to use the word quick, but a logical approach to this at this point.
Well, that's how it's supposed to be, right? That's how it's designed to be, but
well, Mo,
it has a way of going off the rails. But yeah, I mean, the reality is this, and I said this before, we're not going to hit a home run immediately, right?
Right.
And to get to something, Robin raised earlier, that's why the rulemaking process exists, right? It's not a set in stone as a legislative process, because we're going to realize as soon as the rules have been adopted that something got missed. Right. Or something's not working as it should, and we're going to have to revisit it. So that's why we have rulemaking opportunities every year because of that. Tracy.
So this is going to be a little bit of a rookie question, and I'm hoping you can educate me on this. Is there any like standardization or rule across Colorado as far as what is currently adopted? Like you have some counties that are using 2018 IRC, but you may have, let's say, I don't know, as an example, Teller County that's still on 2015, that may communicate something like they're not adopting 2018 or they're currently on 2015. If they plan to adopt 2018, they may not adopt the Appendix Q or AQ. What does that do for a tiny house person that goes to that Teller County? This is not, is there any insight you can kind of educate me on that, Mo? Like, is there a standard that all counties are required to be using 2018 by a certain time?
Nope. No. So that's the beauty about the state program though, right? So right now, and this is why Eric ran this bill, right? A tiny home builder and a tiny home purchaser is left up to whatever that jurisdiction requires. Right, and that can be anything right now. Right, yeah, exactly. This program, but it doesn't go into effect until July 1st, right, of 2023. Whatever this committee recommends and is ultimately adopted by State Housing Board, those requirements are now statewide.
Okay,
right. So if you go into
example,
Teller County,
yeah,
right, and their zoning allows for this product, right, they have to accept whatever that tiny home was built to and certified under state program. So if we happen to be on 2018 IRC Appendix AQ and whatever other modifications we have in our administrative rules, they have to accept that, right? The only thing we'll take into account, and we have to make sure through our process that we're taking into account, is whatever unique climatic geographic conditions they have that is allowed through statute, wind and snow load being the big ones.
perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, so this will make life a lot easier.
Yep.
If zoning allows for it.
Okay.
Nate.
Tracy, one preview to what happens. The process that Mo just it's great because it's statewide. The challenge is what'll happen is let's just say, for example, we adopt the 2018 Appendix AQ with whatever you have going on. You will walk into building departments who have adopted the 2021, and they will tell you that they require that the 2021 code be met. And you will end up in these endless conversations, as us and the modular side have been in for decades, politely explaining how the state program works. Many of them have been, some are better than others, but essentially the authority rests in what we adopt here, not what they've adopted locally. Sometimes you have to explain that to them. And I will also say that Mo and Donnie and Sam going forward do a great job when we run into those challenges at a local jurisdiction, trying to help and just kind of explain to everybody and get everybody on the same page. So that's in your future once we adopt all these things.
Yeah, well said. Tracy, it's amazing. The number one conversation I've had since I've been working for Division of Housing since August 7th of 2017 is with local jurisdictions, explaining to them the law. Sometimes the federal law with regard to HUD manufactured homes, right? Because I understand local building departments' need and desire to ensure that the product that's coming into their jurisdiction is safe, right? But where we get cross with each other is understanding that their jurisdiction only goes so far for something built off site, right? With regard to its construction. So we've actually made some clarifying changes to the statute through a separate bill from 2021. I would encourage you guys to look at that too. House Bill 21-1019, where we made it clear as much as possible where the local jurisdiction ends and the state or the federal jurisdiction picks up. And we tried to address also, duplicating regulation in essence, right? So Nate has had examples where he'll contact me and say, hey, this county is making us go through their plan review process, and we've already got it signed off on your end, right? Can you help? So we contact him and explain, you can't double regulate. And we made this clear in the law. This is already, they're going through a state regulated process, right? This is all you have jurisdiction over. So if you ever have examples of that, as we move forward on and after July 1st, 2023, contact Donnie and Sam, and they'll help address it. It doesn't mean this will magically make sense to everybody, because the law has been passed, the rules have been passed, and the process is in place, right? We're going to be revisiting this with local jurisdictions all the time, and we're going to try to get better about communicating with them. But as you can imagine, turnover exists on the local level, and sometimes that person who knew everything about our program is no longer there, and for some reason that institutional knowledge has not been passed on. So we have this come up all the time, these conversations, but we can't do anything about it unless you tell us about it, right? So if you're communicating with Teller County and they're making you do something outside of what the state law actually allows, it's imperative that you contact us so we can help you address that and help educate them on what the law actually allows. Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. Just to tag on maybe Tracy's question, I think we answered Colorado's is, I guess, a home rule, considered home rule state, and cities and counties can adopt whichever version or edition of the codes that they choose to, or if they don't choose to do any. So there's no state building code in Colorado like there is in California, et cetera, other places. But with that being said, and Mo, it's going to kind of come back to you for clarification that we're going to talk at the TAC with Foundation, trying to get that all sorted out of what that's going to be required, but it would still be up to the local jurisdiction to enforce whatever foundation requirements that they have adopted based on whatever version of the code. So let's say this is going to go 2018 tiny home appendix, but you go into a jurisdiction that's still under the, say, the 2012, or on the other hand, maybe to the 21, like in Broomfield here in 3 or 4 months. Is that true still, the way we're going to go to the path that we're going to end up?
Sorry, I missed your question and all that. What
Oh,
was
I'm
your
sorry.
question?
So it's similar to like a manufactured home, but we are required to accept the unit that's going to have the state tag
Correct,
going through the tiny home program once it's set up.
correct,
But they would still have to come into the building department
Correct.
and get a permit for how it's attached to the ground based
Correct.
on, could be a different code. I think that's what I was trying to clarify for Tracy, that the manufacturers would go through the program under the, say, the 2018 with amended AQ or an appendix Q, but they still have to come in and provide whatever foundation system that based on whatever code that jurisdiction.
correct.
my
Yeah. No,
question.
you're spot on, Tim. So yeah, you could be dealing, let's do Teller County again. What did you say they were on, Tracy?
They were on 2015, although
Okay,
they're
so
approving
perfect
tiny
example.
homes. Yeah,
Perfect example, right? So in 2015, so they may have site requirements, right? And the foundation requirements all on 2015, right? But our structure, in this instance, we're not doing tiny homes yet, will be built to 2018, right? And then you could have the reverse. You could have a jurisdictions on the 2021 code where all the site foundation requirements. So you, the builder, and that's what you got to factor. And that's what makes it interesting, confusing too. And where the seller gets involved in developers, right? You could be working on a project on 2 different codes, right? Because the local jurisdiction still has jurisdiction over that site work, including the foundation requirements, right? And those connections. But the structure itself and its installation, tying it to the earth, is still under our program.
That
So
makes
just keep that in
complete
mind.
sense.
You might
It
be
makes
working with 2.
No, and that makes complete sense. I mean, that's almost kind of how it is right now. I mean, I still have to go through the local jurisdictions to figure out
Correct.
how to permanently or semi-permanently attach a tiny home per their requirements geographically for, whatever reasons for you all already know this, right? We got to
Correct.
pull the permit, all that stuff. So all of that makes sense.
Correct. So you'll still have to do that. It's just the difference now is the structure itself will be the state program and its installation will be the state program. Mark,
This may be an elephant in the room. Labeling, Mo. If we do not adopt the IRC for tiny homes, would a specific label have to be on there since our labels now address the IRC for residentials?
well, it's going to be a different label.
Will
Yep.
it be a different one underneath the IRC?
Depends on what we adopt.
Okay. I knew that was gonna be.
Right?
I knew it was gonna
So,
be.
yeah. So
but-
that topic of discussion is scheduled for
I'm looking.
January 3rd,
Okay,
certification.
okay.
Yep. But we're definitely have to think about that too. And not just for tiny homes, right?
Right.
We're gonna have to start thinking about multifamily structures too, if we need to label that differently, because we now have installation requirements there under the state program. So there's a lot to unpack there, but you're absolutely right. At the end of this journey, we have to figure out how to label this. And it's most likely going to be similar in some instances to modular, just guessing, but also different. So how do we capture that? Sorry, I just heard something. Is that just background noise? Byron, you have your hand up?
I do, yes. Perhaps I'm confused or just don't understand the clarification you gave. Now, you're saying that the municipalities or individual departments will have to accept the building code, the code that TAC writes. But on the temporary permanent foundation or whatever it's going to be called, they do not have to accept that, even if you have that defined in the TAC code. Is that correct, or am I
That's correct.
misunderstanding?
That's correct. So I'll give you the modular world for an example, right? A modular home has to be on a permanent foundation. we've defined what it means, right? Not very well until Eric changed the statute to address it. But that foundation itself, right, is under the local jurisdiction. We just require that be a permanent foundation. They dictate what that actually ends up being, right? We're just then worried about the connection between that and the structure, and of course the structure itself. But the foundation itself, approving it, inspecting it, etc., that's under the local jurisdiction.
So why is the TAC going to even deal with the foundation if that's the case?
Well, there's two parts to it. One is determining whether or not a permanent or temporary foundation is required, right? And how to tie to it, number one. Number two, there are jurisdictions that do not have a building department. So we're going to have to establish foundation requirements of our own for the first time to address that. That's a hole that we identified, that we shared with Eric, and he corrected it in the bill.
Is there a way of making it so the municipalities have to accept your definition of a foundation as well if they're accepting the building code that TAC is going to create?
Yes, but that would require legislative change, not through this process.
Thank you.
And same with zoning. All that requires legislative changes outside of our bailiwick. Good questions. Sean?
Yeah, Mo, maybe HUD code is a better example where we can have permanent foundations. And then like in the case of a manufactured home community, we have basically a minimum requirement for crowning and then a support diagrams and things like that, including tie down systems. And that really can, like Mesa County as an example, on a HUD code manufactured home, they don't require a foundation. But we still have to meet the state standards of crowning the site, doing the right load supports, doing the right tie downs, all those, and having it inspected by, in our case, an independent state inspector or state approved inspector. But then other counties can require their version of a permanent foundation, which we would then have to build to the way they want it done in order to get a CO. So I kind of see this as being the same thing. If somebody wants to put a tiny home structure in an RV park, there's probably going to be a set of requirements, but it may not include putting in concrete or piers or, you know, helical piers or anything like that. I think that's a little bit to be determined yet, but I just wanted to throw that out there for discussion.
Great, thank you, Sean. And that's a great point. Tim's got to go. Thanks, Tim. Talk to you later. I got to go soon too as well. But before we go, and hopefully Tim can catch this, are we staying at the 2018 base IRC and amending Appendix Q to reflect the changes that we'd like from Appendix AQ from the 2021 IRC? Is that our starting point? That was one of the options. Mark?
I would say yes. I would vote yes. That we would start with the 2018, make our changes that we need to through the, and then reevaluate it after the 2024 comes out.
So just to clarify, don't adopt AQ to 2021, just change 2018 Q.
Right.
Okay. And Sean, I just saw your note to the panelists. Are you saying the same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So
So
this
that's-
discussion can continue next week, obviously, but just to capture one thing, where I heard changes needed to the and Appendix Q have to do with chassis, energy code requirements, fixture clearances, loft heights, egress windows. Was there anything else? I mean, people can suggest other things too, but that's what I heard so far.
There may be some framing, you know, from the perspective of like, we use ridge beams. micro limbs, versa limbs. I think that's one of the things that's missing. We do a lot of 2x4 framing. However, we still need to build that, roof strength. And I think that a lot of builders are only putting 2x4s up there without a ridge beam. And so I don't think that's a very good best practice, and we should probably be a better example.
That's not addressed in the IRC itself?
It probably is, actually. I apologize.
Yeah, because my understanding is, and someone let me know if I'm wrong, above the chassis, it's already pretty much addressed to the IRC, because that's what modular is pretty much, right? Or site built for that matter. It's just, the hole seems to be in these other areas. We start to get below that, but maybe I'm wrong.
The IRC already adjusts roof construction and ceiling joists, or so when you tie the home together, whether you do a ridge board or a ridge beam. So if they're building with 2x4s as a ridge beam and they don't have ceiling ties or ceiling joists, they're not doing it.
They're not to code.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about like the Simpson strong ties, Eric, that we're using to attach the, bottom plates to the trailers permanently?
Well,
Is that just going
typically,
to fall under the same thing under IRC with
yeah,
just
and
standard
most
frame?
people use
Okay.
anchor bolts, but we have to do
Same thing.
something different. Yeah, some way to
Okay.
tie the loads all the way down, especially because there are high winds in Colorado.
Okay.
And I'll let you guys pick up with Eric, identifying those holes. But before I leave, because I'm going to leave here soon, I just want to make sure I've captured our starting point. Does any TAC member disagree with starting with the 2018 IRC and amending Appendix Q, taking into account whatever Appendix AQ does better, and also taking into account what it doesn't address that needs to be addressed? Does anybody disagree with that starting point? Okay, great, and that's our starting point. And Eric has identified some holes. If there are any other holes that aren't addressed, right, by the 2018 IRC or the Appendix AQ or Q, please get that to Eric. Eric, do you mind? And Margarita just asked too. Do you mind if I share with everybody your email address in this chat?
No, I just put it in the chat too. It's
Oh, you
just-
did? Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
Yeah, you
Great,
can email
thank
me
you.
and I can forward them to Mo if you don't get them directly to
Perfect.
Mo and his team.
Yeah, so if you could email us too, while you email Eric, that'd be helpful, just in case he's out. Although he's always very much present, even when he's out. Donnie,
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to add in there and, see what you guys' thoughts are, but do we have a maximum size for the tiny home? Are we considering a minimum size?
the maximum size is 400 square feet.
Yeah, but are we considering a minimum size?
I haven't heard anybody
A
say
size,
anything.
a size that's too small to be considered.
I know what it means. Yeah, I hear you. I haven't heard anyone raise that.
Per the IRC, there's an effective minimum size because a habitable room has to be at least 70 square feet, at least 7 foot in the least dimension. And then the bathroom, and if you're going to meet the fixture clearances, that's probably another at least 30 square feet. So it's going to set a floor practically be up below which you can't build it.
Yeah, because like I mentioned earlier, the IPMC mentions dimensions, right? I think in total it'd be like 315 square feet, but if a builder wants to build less than 315 square feet on the plan review side, when it does come up, is it something that we would accept? So that's why I'm bringing it up now. So we don't run down the road, and we have people building less than 300 square feet, and it's a really, really small. It's actually a tiny, tiny home. So.
Well, the other thing to think about too, Donnie, and you raised an excellent point, is folks interested in community living, right? So we're gonna have, the single family, if you will, tiny home structure. That's a dwelling that has everything in it, right? It's code compliant as a dwelling. But you're gonna have the other examples out there for community living, and this really comes up in initiatives by local jurisdictions to address homelessness, for an example, right? Where you have the shelter, right? And it's most likely just a bedroom, right? And then all the other important ingredients to the code compliance are actually in a shared structure, right? Kitchen, bathroom, etc. So there's also that model out there we might want to take into account for as well. And I'm guessing that could be through the IBC.
I would say IBC would
Yeah,
probably most closely align with that type of.
yeah,
layout.
exactly. So just keep that in mind. I want to make sure whatever we do, we keep as many options available as possible as people get creative with addressing housing needs. But we need to find a route for them that works to ensure code compliance and safety as well, right? But just keep that in mind, whatever we do, just keep the options out there. But of course, don't make it so confusing that no one can understand them either. Tracy?
I just wanted to just give the team some general education on the engineered tiny house trailer foundations. Typically you can go down to as small as a 12-foot by or 8-foot by 12-foot tiny house trailer foundation. It's not typical in our industry. The majority of the builders across the United States, I would say the smallest unit is usually a 16 or 8 by 16, which is, what, roughly 128 square feet, with being able to still meet IRC code for plumbing clearances and things of that nature. So I don't, just wanted you guys to know from like a trailer perspective that are meant to build these houses on, you can go as small as 12 by 8.
Mm-hmm. That's very helpful. And it looks like Mike Schmidt had added to that in the chat in a very entertaining fashion. Given a chance to read it. But anyway, we can identify that and have further discussions about it as well. So please get us your thoughts on what holes need to be plugged as we start with the 2018 IRC base and appendix Q/AQ is what I'm going to call it now. Anything else? Eric, anything else?
I think this is great for today. The only other thing I would add to Byron's question about foundations and temporary foundations. Yeah, as the local authority having jurisdiction, it would be up to us. But if there was a hole in the code and the state had adopted some kind of standard for those counties that didn't have it, we would certainly look to that as a model going, okay, this might solve our problem. Yeah, we can use helical piers attached to a tiny home in a certain way. So that's going to provide guidance to a lot of locals. It's not going to force them to adopt anything, but it will, lead us in a certain direction.
Great. And just a reminder, if you could email myself and Sam and Eric with any thoughts that you have about the holes that need to be filled as we build from the 2018 IRC, that's greatly appreciated. The sooner the better. We have 1 week to turn around between now and the next meeting, and we want to keep the next meeting as focused as possible on those holes, right? And start crafting language to fill those holes. Okay, that's going to be the focus. We'd love to get something out for everybody to chew on by Friday at the latest. So if you can get us that information sooner than later, it'd be greatly appreciated. We've already scheduled a meeting with Eric tomorrow to chat about this. We can, of course, schedule additional meetings as needed. So we will start that process internally with Eric and then present it to everybody by Friday. Okay? Does that work?
Works here.
Excellent. Any other comments, questions, concerns? All right. Tracy, you still have your hand up from earlier or something new? Okay. Great. Well, good discussion, folks. Looking forward to our conversation next Tuesday at 8:30. Don't forget to get your input email, though, to Eric, myself, and Sam as soon as possible. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Jim, you can end the recording now.
Take care of yourself, Mo.
Thank you. Wish me
Take
luck.
care, everybody.
Hopefully you feel better.
Oh, and don't forget,
Feel better, Mo.
go USA noon
Yes.
against Iran.
Thanks,
Take care,
Mo.
guys.
Take care.
Ciao.